The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
That's what Japan does not need. An imminent earthquake warning just issued for several regions of the country. On edge there, on edge here, because it really didn't start with Japan. Take a look at what experts are increasingly calling the so-called ring of fire that is circling the entire Pacific Ocean. Do you remember Chile's massive earthquake about a year ago? Then we had that big one in New Zealand just last month. Then, of course, Japan. And if this clockwise trend continues, my next guest says North America looks to be on tap next. Don't laugh. Geologist Jim Berkland is worried, and when he worries, you should worry too. Jim accurately predicted, get this, the 1989 so-called World Series earthquake 4 days before it shook the San Francisco Bay Area. And Jim says this month is of particular concern. Why, Jim?
The month of October, March, and April are the three most devastating earthquakes in terms of damage in the San Francisco Bay Area in history. And we're having, on the 19th of this month, not only the full moon, but within an hour, the closest approach to the moon until the year 2016. And the next day is the equinoctial tide. So you're bringing together three of the maximum tide-raising forces. And we know about the ocean tides, but there's also an earth tide, and there's a tide in the groundwater. And all of these help to release sudden built-up strain and cause earthquakes.
All right, but that would seem to imply that we could be looking at a very imminent event in the United States within the next week or two. Is that right?
Yes, what I call a seismic window. This top seismic window in years is developing between the 19th and 26th of this month. And this was 7.0 monster, and it says geologists had warned about it. And a week earlier, they were talking about the tides, not to worry about the really high tides coming up. Well, I think there's worry here, too.
All right, so let me just understand. You're a genius. I'm not, so I just want to follow your fine brain on this.
Not a genius.
What you're saying is that there is a certain order to this, even though it doesn't appear like it. For a lot of folks, it just seems like random events. But you're saying that there is a process unfolding here. For California, or California, Oregon, or whatever, what would that mean? What type of quake or disturbance or disruption would that be?
Well, if it was one in the Northwest, in the Cascadia Trench, like we had in 1700, that would be a 9-magnitude quake. I'm not predicting that. But I'm saying we've just had a massive fish kill. Maybe 1 million fish died in Redondo Beach. They had a massive fish sweep in Mexico. We just had a bunch of whales come in close to San Diego.
And what is that presage? When you have events like that, what does that generally mean? What's going on in the waters?
Changes in the magnetic field that often precede larger earthquakes. Most animals have the mineral magnetite in their bodies, including people, but it causes homing pigeons to enable them to get home. Just before big quakes, they often can't get home. There's a delay factor. And so we look for those kinds of things. Just before the World Series quake, there was a very unusual beaching of rare beaked whales in the ocean beach of San Francisco, and then just after that, a equally rare pygmy sperm whale washed up at Santa Cruz within about 5 miles of the epicenter of the World Series quake. And that kind of beaching had never occurred before nor since. So we're looking for strange fish coming from deep water into shallow water, wild animals coming into cities. I used to just scoff at these kinds of things because I was a mainstream geologist until I found out that earthquakes were fitting a pattern. The big earthquake in the Indian Ocean followed the massive beachings of whales in Taiwan, not Taiwan, but New Zealand and Australia and Tasmania. And then within a couple of days, they had a 8.3 in south of New Zealand, and then came the 9.1 in the Indian Ocean with a big tsunami on the very day of the full moon.
Wow.
The previous big quake and tsunami was in Alaska, was the 9.2 magnitude event on the day of the full moon on the 27th of
All right,
March.
Jim, so bottom line, we have a lot to watch, and believe me, your track record compels us to watch it. Jim, thank you very much. I hope you're wrong, buddy. I really hope you're wrong, but your record seems to...
Well, especially at this time.
Right. All right, buddy.
The world history, and it's not good.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Jim Berkland in San Francisco. He's a pretty good geologist.
Exo Nation, Jim Berkland is my guest this hour here in the X Zone. We'll be able to talk more to Jim about his amazing predictions, how he does it, what we can look for, and how, by listening to this show this hour, you can save your life. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Jim Berkland is my guest when I come back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Jim Berkland is my special guest for this hour. He is the man who predicts earthquakes. Jim Berkland is a geologist studying earthquake prediction. He claims to have developed a method for predicting earthquakes and offers his predictions through media appearances and publications. Before his retirement, Jim worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, the Bureau of Reclamation, and Santa Clara County in California. He has published over 50 scientific papers. Jim Berkland studied geology at the University of California, Berkeley, earning the BA degree in 1958. Thereafter, he worked for the U.S. Geological Survey while pursuing a graduate study. In 1964, he took a position at the Bureau of Reclamation. After further graduate study, he taught for a year at Appalachian State University from 1972 to 1973, then returned to California to work as a county geologist for Santa Clara County from 1973 until he retired in 1994. And I'll tell you something, Exo Nation, after speaking to Jim before the show and during the breaks, he works harder now, I think, than he did for the U.S. Geological Service. And Jim Berkland, welcome to the X Zone. Always great having you with us.
Well, my pleasure, and especially get the word out of rather a critical period in seismic history, I think.
Now, Jim, before we get into the prediction that is so important that we have to get out to the world, tell us a little bit about the predictions that you've been successful with in the past.
Okay. Well, with my 10-year degree, working on my degrees with college and universities, I was convinced that earthquakes could not be predicted because all of my books said they could not be predicted, and my professors said it, and I had no personal knowledge about it. And so when I finally got out of the mainstream and became a county geologist in 1973, for those first 4 months at the end of that year, I was greeted with 6 earthquakes in the greater Bay Area. And then on January 8th of 1974, there was a very extreme high tide period, similar to what we just had on Saturday, this last Saturday. And at that time, they were warning about that there might be flooding along the seacoasts, and that if all it took was maybe a big storm at sea and big waves coming in and freshwater flooding coming down the bay and the rivers, that make the high waters overtop the levees. Well, lucky it was a very bluebird day here in the Bay Area, but down in Oxnard, those really high tides and waves came in and a lot of damage down there along the seacoast. But on that day of January 8th, 1974, just getting a hint from the newspapers, I said, if the moon, but why those high tides? It was the day of the full moon, 3 days after the closest approach of the Earth and the Sun for the year, and about an hour and a half away from the closest approach of the moon in about 10 years. That combination meant extremely high tides. So I said, if the moon is mainly responsible for causing ocean tides, maybe the solid Earth is going up and down too, and maybe loosening up the fault lines. Let me see. Well, we've had 6 quakes around here in the last 3 months, so let's look at the day after the full moon, 2 days after the new moon, on the day of an eclipse. And so 6 out of 6 fit this wild idea. I thought it was the only one that ever had such a concept. And for 2 years, I kept it rather close to the vest. But that day, the 8th of January, 1974, I said, maybe we'll have a quake of 4 to 5 magnitude in the South Bay Area here. And I predicted it to my colleagues and to one geologist with the state of California who quickly changed the subject because, high science does not predict earthquakes. They've never been able to, as far as I can see. And so I said there would be a 4 to 5 magnitude quake within a week, and 2 days later, the 4.4 shook the county. And I thought, this is really simple. What's so tough about predicting earthquakes? So I predicted one for February, and that one hit. I was 6 out of 8 for 1974, and amazingly, on Thanksgiving Day of 1974, we were at the movies with my daughter while my wife was fixing turkey, and I safely got out of underfoot. She's from Canada and had never felt an earthquake. But the night before that Thanksgiving, I attended a USGS meeting of the Pick and Hammer Club. And the subject was earthquake prediction in the state of the art, and I asked if I could speak, and it was from the moderator. Said, "Sure, Jim," but actually the meeting ran from late. It was supposed to end at 10 and was going on to 10:45. The moderator said, "We'll catch you next month." And I said, "Oh, just give me 5 minutes." "No, I'm sorry." So I handed out Xerox copies of my prediction for a 4.5, give or take, 1 magnitude quake for the Bay Area. And I expected it would happen the day after Thanksgiving. Anyway, the next day, I was at the movies with my daughter, and while we were there, the theater shook. And we thought it was part of the special effects of the first run of the movie Earthquake.
Oh, my God.
Carlton Heston.
Yeah.
So came rushing out to after the movie, we just thought we had experienced a movie event. And turned on the car radio and heard about this 5.2 quake had shaken the whole Bay Area over to Monterey and Modesto and up to Santa Rosa. And so I said, for the first 2 or 3 seconds, I thought there was Orson Welles or something was getting in the act, because I just seen Los Angeles destroyed by this big quake, and I found that it was a real one. I checked my watch. It was 9 hours early. It wasn't supposed to happen until after midnight. So my critics have said, "You missed it, Jim." Well, it was the strongest quake in 3 years in the Bay Area, and it was rather impressive. So and then there wasn't any so strong in the Bay Area until 5 years later, and at that time I was getting much more deeply into prediction, and we had a high tide and the full moon in August of 1979, and on August 6th, yes, the quake hit, and it was a 5.9. And it was the strongest quake in the Bay Area since 1911, when on the day after the full moon, it was a 6.6 quake. So anyway, this 5.9 was pretty impressive, and I was in the county building and knew about it. So for the start of my prediction career, it was half a dozen predictions every month, and every year. In fact, in 1975, I only made 2 predictions that year, partly because we were changing our offices and moved to a high-rise building for the county. Then I got a little more well-known by my colleagues and service clubs and places where I would speak about earthquakes and geology and in general. My main role as county geologist was to try to keep people from building on active faults or active landslides. And so it wasn't until after 1974 that I started looking into what had happened in the past and found that there were several other scientists over the years had predicted earthquakes based largely on the phase of the moon. And so I realized I was just a Jimmy come lately. But of course, the big notoriety came from my prediction of the World Series quake, which I named in the Gilroy Dispatch 4 days before it happened on October 17th, 1989. And the reason I predicted that was multifold. At the beginning of 1979, I'm talking about 89 now, I looked at sending out what I called the top window list for the year, and I looked at each month when they had the maximum tidal forces. And I knew that October 14 to 21 was going to be rather impressive for tidal forces, and I made a prediction that there would be a major quake, a 7+, around the Pacific Ring of Fire, where indeed some 80% of the world's larger quakes occur. And so I didn't anticipate at that time, in January of 1989, that I was going to be participating in this Ring of Fire quake. But what gave me strong indications that such a quake was going to be locally, not just over in the Philippines or somewhere, is because we suddenly had all kinds of strange animal behaviors. We had homing pigeons getting lost. We had unusual whales beaching themselves at San Francisco and Santa Cruz, which has not happened before or since. And they were live, and they carried them to Marine World and down to Monterey Aquarium, and we've never seen it before or since. But they were right just before the World Series quake. Now, to add a little bit to that, 3 days before the quake in Christchurch, New Zealand,
yes,
107 pilot whales beached themselves in the south part of New Zealand.
So if I understand correctly, if we were to watch Mother Nature's warning signs, like any of the the homing pigeon that uses the the electromagnetic fields,
magnetite,
right?
It's cranium, yeah.
So we would get a better hint of what's happening around us, and we too could be an earthquake predictor, just like you.
Absolutely, and I just see on the internet, North Koreans told to use pets as quake warning. That's in today's from Pyongyang.
All right,
they're
Jim.
Catching on. Even in North Korea, they're catching on, but my buddies in the USGS don't.
Jim, you and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. When we come back, Exo Nation, we're going to be giving you a warning, a very serious warning. And I'm going to ask you, each and every one of you, to get your friends, your family, your relatives, your associates to listen to what Jim has to say. Jim Berkland is our very special guest. www.syzygyjob.com. Jim Berkland, the man who predicts earthquakes, is my guest this hour here on the X Zone from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. You're listening to the X Zone Radio Show, live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network. X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio,
Euro High Definition Radio,
and Star Cable. Our toll-free telephone number worldwide is 1-800-610-7035.
Our email address, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com.
On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com,
And our website,
www.xzoneradiotv.com. Nation, welcome back. Jim Berkland is my special guest. Jim is known worldwide as the man who predicts earthquakes. His website is www.syzygyjob.com. That's Syzyjob. Syzyjob? How do you pronounce your website? Syzygyjob.com.
Yeah, like yoked together like a team of oxen.
Gotcha. Jim, you have a very important message that you want to share with the world. A warning.
Well, for one thing, my wife was born in Canada, and in New Brunswick, and she had never felt an earthquake in her life before that Thanksgiving Day quake of 1974. And in 1982, New Brunswick had its strongest earthquake in 126 years. And I was called from a New Brunswick station to see if I'd predicted their quake. And I said, well, I didn't know about the animals there, the water levels, the changes in springs, and that sort of thing. That helps me pin down the where and how big. But as to the when, it was certainly in an appropriate time because it was the day of an eclipse of the moon when the Bay of Fundy tides were over 55 feet, some of the highest tides possible. And that was on... Saturday morning, and about January, just about 3 days later in the week, I was phoned by the radio station back there and wondered if I predicted their quake, and I said I could predict the time, but not really the place. But if I'd had some interesting information on animals and water levels and radon gas release and that sort of thing, I might have honed in on New Brunswick instead of the Bay Area. And then a lady, a native New Brunswicker, up near Fredericton, she wrote me a letter. Said, I hope you have an explanation for what happened to me, because I heard you talking about animal reactions before quakes. But let me tell you, as a 46-year-old teacher here in New Brunswick, I'd never felt a quake before. And 3 days before that quake, I developed a terrible headache. It was just, I've never had such a headache, and it was kind of centered in the middle of my forehead. Well, that turns out to be where the magnetite is in the human body, over the pineal gland, but I didn't know it until another 10 years after that. And she said it continued. I couldn't even teach. One day I was home in bed, and I went to bed without supper, and I tried to get up early the next morning, and the pain and pressure was still there. And then suddenly, as if passing a mountain peak, the pain and pressure disappeared, and she marveled at this return to normalcy, she said. And then the first tremors came rolling through from like 80 miles north, and it was felt way down the States and New York, and it was a pretty impressive quake. Well, then she called me in March. I called her immediately and said, you should make use of this sensitivity and call the University of New Brunswick and see if you really have a certain sensitivity, which I just barely started to accept was possible in people. And she was a very private person that didn't want any kind of notoriety. And I said, well, we're going to be coming to see my wife's folks there in New Brunswick this summer, and I'd like to talk to you. Well, I don't know. And then came March, the strongest aftershock in 3 months. And this gal said, it all came back yesterday, and today we had the strongest shake. I don't believe I can take it anymore. I'm going to give up my home in my native New Brunswick and move. And I said, hang on. You'll find that it's a great place to be, New Brunswick, for quakes, not having any. And you'll find that the aftershocks reduce in number and in the magnitude. Well, I don't know. So very interestingly, that July, we flew up to, I guess it was St. John's, and we then had a rental car, and my wife stayed with her folks, visiting the family, and I took my young son and the daughter of a very near friend, a name you may know, Stanton T. Friedman.
Oh, yes, very well known.
Yes, okay. Well, that was his daughter, and this was back in 1982. So we went over the St. Johns River and went to the nearest market, and they said, do you know where the Cuddybacks live? Oh, yeah, you go over by that barn and over that rack. And so I pulled into the driveway, and I saw a fellow unloading the trunk of his car, and they said, have I found the Cuddyback residence? Well, it was till 3 weeks ago. They moved to Virginia. He had bought the farm. Not the real way you say bought the farm. He was occupying the farm.
Right.
The Cuddybacks. I've never heard from her again. But that was the first of now 21 separate accounts I've had from people that get earthquake headaches, and it's almost all identical. It starts about 3 days before a local quake, not something around the world, but something they experience. And just within an hour or so of the actual event, the pain and pressure disappear, and they can tell their family, uh-oh, it's a-coming, that one I've been telling you about. So now 21 people have had almost identical responses, and they've told me because they often feel free to talk to me because of such weird things. They don't want to be considered crazy. And, like they're calling me a clown for predicting this, which is supposed to not be science, using animals and people's headaches and that sort of thing. But I've come around to being much more open-minded. It's good to have open eyes and ears, but you need to be open-minded to accept the possibility of new facts seeping in. So that was most interesting. And so after not being able to talk to Mrs. Cuddyback, I went to the University of New Brunswick, and I called up the geology department, and a fellow came down to meet me. This is summertime. And I said, how do you do? I'm Jim Berkland, a geologist from California, and I have a concept about the timing of earthquakes in general, and yours in particular, which had happened, the previous January. And he looked at me and said, well, it was on the day of the eclipse of the moon when the tides were extremely high in the Bay of Fundy. We think this extra stress triggered a weak place in the fault. And my jaw dropped, and I said, that's my idea. I wish you would come to California and talk to some of my colleagues that seem to not recognize that. Well, in my trips to Peru, to Machu Picchu, to the pyramids, and to China, all these places have already recognized the importance of the moon in regard to quakes. When I went to see the eclipse of the moon in Peru, just before we got to Machu Picchu, the gal that was leading us, an Indian, from the Peruvians, and she spoke to us at the head of the bus before we all got to enter the lodge, and she said, "I'm so glad all of you were able to see our eclipse. We in Peru have a tradition. We watch the eclipse and then we wait for the earthquake." And I said, "Whoops!" I raised up my video camera, which had been sitting idly, and said, "Please repeat that." Well, she gave me about a 5-minute interview right after everybody had loaded from the bus, and she said, we've known it for hundreds of years. And it turned out that afternoon, or the next day, a 6.2 blocked a highway in Peru, and it wasn't a major quake or a great quake, but it was a substantial, called a moderate quake, and it did some damage. And it came the day after the eclipse of the sun. So on and on, there are so many examples, it's hard to ignore. When I was 3 months old, 3 years and about 3 months, my family moved us out of Long Beach, California, just ahead of the big earthquake of, we thought it was pretty big down there, 6.3. And I was back in Iowa with the rest of the family while they were showing me off to the Berkland and the group. And that's when the Long Beach quake hit. And startlingly, the experts, engineers and geologists that inspected the devastation in Long Beach came up to the startling conclusion that had that earthquake occurred in the middle of the afternoon when the schools were in full session, we would have lost between 10,000 and 30,000 school kids.
My heavens.
Yeah, like third world. And that's been kept under wraps quite a bit, but you can still find it in the old newspapers. Well, why was that so bad? Because the shoddy construction of our schools. Well, that was on the 10th of March in 1933, and immediately Governor Olson got the legislature to get off their duff, and they adopted what's called the Field Act, which required special concerns about construction of schools. And very gradually they began to trade off or sell off the old schools or tear them down and rebuild them, and with modern construction techniques. And we have not lost kids from earthquakes ever since then in schools. However, except for those that became private or parochial schools in the old style of construction, and there's still some major damage in those structures. But it's probably the most meaningful earthquake safety legislation in the history of, well, certainly the United States. And guess what? That quake in Long Beach was on the day of an eclipse of the moon. And then you had to wait from 33 till 1971 for the next destructive quake in the Los Angeles area. And that was the San Fernando quake of February 9th of 1971, about 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was quite devastating. My relatives were down there. And not too surprisingly, that quake, it was a 6.6, was on the day of an eclipse of the moon. So those two were both on the day of an eclipse. And the last three major 9 magnitude quakes, super quakes around the world. The last one was on this month in Japan. 9 magnitude came 5 days after the new moon. And then the previous 9 magnitude was in the Indian Ocean in 2004, day after Christmas. And you may remember the big animals, the elephants and everything, had fled up to the hills and avoided the big tsunami. Well, that was on the day of the full moon. And then the previous 9 magnitude quake in the world was way back in 1964 in southern Alaska. It was considered a 9.2 under the new scales. And a gal from Seward, Alaska, called me about being there in Seward when that quake hit. And she said, it was surprising. All of the seagulls had disappeared from the harbor that day. And in the city, there were rats and mice running around the streets in daylight. Well, not coincidental, although many of my colleagues would suggest it's old wives' tales or something. Well, guess what? That quake on, March the 27th, Good Friday, 1964, was on the day of a full moon. So the last 3 of the last 4 9 magnitude quakes were at the time of a syzygy,
all right,
newer full moon.
Jim, very shortly you and I have to go to a commercial break. When we come back from the break, you have been predicting for some time now that between March 19 and March 26 of this year, there's going to be a major earthquake.
Around the Ring of Fire?
Yes.
And then we're going to have a lesser quake in the California and Washington, Oregon.
All right, Jim. What magnitude are you predicting for the biggie?
Well, not that well. There'd be a 7+ around the Ring of Fire, as happened the last time we had extremely high tides. I believe it was 1993, about 18 years before this one, and the day after that there was a 7.2 quake in the South Pacific. So major quakes happen about 15 times a year, except last year when it was 23 times. Pretty unusual. This year already we've had 8 major quakes of 7 plus. So we can explain a little bit more about just what happened on Saturday and Sunday this year.
All right, we'll do that when we come back from this break. Jim Berkland is our very special guest, Exo Nation. He is the man who predicts earthquakes. His website, www.syzygyjob.com. That's www.syzygyjob.com. And Exo Nation, Jim has issued over 50 publications in geology. He is a member of the Association of Engineering Geologists, the Peninsula Geological Society, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute. He is a fellow of the Geological Society of America and has
50-year fellow this last year.
50-year fellow just this year, and has taught geology at San Jose State University. Jim Berkland, our special guest, and I return on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
Send to the clowns.
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair?
Exo Nation, Jim Berkland is my special guest this hour. And I've got to let you know something, Exo Nation. I played the clown song, Bring in the Clowns, by Judy Collins, because of a story Jim told me. And Jim, let's tell the audience why I played that song.
Okay. In the Wall Street Journal in 1990, there was an article about what I'd been doing thanks to a young entrepreneur. He said, you were told not to predict any more quakes on county time, but isn't this a good avenue to get the word out? Because the 900 line would make it available to anybody that wants it, and they don't have to pay, don't have to experience it unless they want to. And so it was a pretty good idea for a while. I was finally convinced that I was not in this commercially, but mainly to get the word out. And so we began it for 10 years. We did have a 900 line, and then of course after the computers all came in and email, the number just dropped off dramatically. And instead of making maybe $200 a month, it came down to about $20 a month. So after 10 years, I gave it up anyway, and concentrated on my website and my monthly newsletter, which I've been sending out ever since I was on suspension for having predicted the quake. And they said at the county, I lost my assistant. I got a smaller office, and I was told not to take any more field work. Well, that's almost deadly for a geologist.
Sure.
But, So anyway, I then was told that I could come back to the county to work as long as I promised I wouldn't predict any more on county time. And that's when I started my newsletter, and it's gone out monthly now for 255 months.
Now, who called you a clown, or was it your comment?
No, the Wall Street Journal picked up on this new endeavor to predict quakes on quake lines. And they thought that's kind of interesting, and they were interested in business and that sort of thing. And they again checked with the U.S. Geological Survey, and one of the leading lights there said, we've known this guy for his entire career, and he's been nothing but a clown. Well, that was kind of slam, and I went to an attorney and said, do I have any claim here? He said, no, you're a public figure, Jim. You have to put up with that kind of thing, but I will send them a letter. And he indicated it was rather unprofessional to slam a fellow professional like that. And they simmered down and they stopped slamming me so directly. When they were asked by the media, what about this guy? One comment was, we don't discuss Berkland and his theory. We have our own theory about Berkland. And I think they should develop some kind of earthquake prediction theory that worked, because they've been failures at doing that since they started, and especially the prediction of a Parkfield quake of 6 magnitude that was supposed to occur between 1984 and 1992, because that would be 22 years after the last big one down in Coalinga, which I'd experienced when I was working with the Bureau of Reclamation. They hadn't had a 6 magnitude about since that time, so they were said it's all going to happen periodically every 22 years, and so they expected it around 1988.
Jim, we're running out of time very fast here. I've got about 30 seconds. You're expecting the next one between the 19th and the 26th of March. We'll have you back on, Jim. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us, and we'll get this word out as much as we can.
Sounds good.
Take care, my friend. Jim Berkland has been my guest this hour, the man who predicts earthquakes. And that's it for tonight, X Zone Nation. So until tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, when once again we meet here in the X Zone, thank you for being with us. Take care of each other, and always, always keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night now.
I know